What's up, everybody? Welcome to a 2-video series that I'm about to do. The quintessential 5 things I love, 5 things I hate, my 2018 R1. Really excited because I've spent a lot of time thinking about these opinions, thinking about what will be relevant to people, and I'm just gonna get started. So the first video is gonna be the 5 things that I hate. Second video is gonna be the 5 things that I love. So, starting off, the 5 things that I hate about my R1. That's really tough too, because it's hard for me to say that I hate anything about this bike because of how much I love it. And of course, when you really admit that you love something and you know you love it, there's going to be some biasness here, right? So keep that in mind. But I did manage to come up with 5 things that I hate about my R1, and I'll even speak in the future in videos that I'm coming out with to what I'm going to be looking for if I ever decide to get a different motorcycle or get rid of the R1. I mean, who knows what the future is going to bring, right? So we're going to start by talking about the 5 things I hate, and we'll just go down a list. No real particular order here, so it's not like, you know, itemized as this is the worst thing and then this. It's just 5 things off the top of my head that I hate about my Yamaha R1. Number 1, we're gonna start with the ergonomics. The ergonomics on the R1, if I could describe them, it would just be painful. I mean, I knew what I was getting into, so it's not that I'm surprised by this, but it has to be mentioned that the ergonomics on this bike, if you're trying to be comfortable, are the extreme opposite. I mean, you're always leaning forward, so you kind of feel like you're falling into the display, which, again, it's something that you knew was going to happen when you get this bike, right? But until you experience it and you're riding it for a while, you can't really understand the full extent of the ergonomics. So the clip-ons at their lowest point are lower than the seat. The seat is very canted forward. Now, I have aftermarket rear sets. I never got to experience the original rear sets from factory on this bike, so I can't speak to those. But the rear sets, they feel pretty high, especially in comparison to my R3, which did have the factory rear sets on it. These are adjustable. I haven't adjusted them at all because they've always fit me pretty much perfectly. Whoever the previous rider was, it seems like we have the same idea of what we like on our rear sets. So the ergonomics overall painful, but they're not built to be comfortable. They're purpose built for racing, to keep you in that racing position. But it's definitely something to consider, you know, especially if you want to just ride this bike around town and in traffic and long distance. I did a long distance ride on this one time and it was pretty painful, not gonna lie, and made the second half, at least, much less enjoyable than it could have been. So number 1, definitely the ergonomics. The second thing that I hate about this motorcycle in particular, now this might not apply to everybody, but it applies to me. So a few things: it has no rear seat. I got it without a rear seat since I bought it used. I took off the rear pegs since it didn't have a rear seat. So what that means is I can't take my wife or friends or whatever, anybody, on the back of it. Now, let's just say the bike had a rear seat. Let's say it had the rear pegs still. Honestly, I don't feel like I could bring my wife on it or any friends that were larger than 120 pounds. So my wife, she's not overweight or anything. She's just a bigger girl. She's 5'9". She's curvy. She's beautiful. But she wouldn't fit on the back of this. I mean, I wouldn't fit on the back of this. That's just my opinion. I'm like 170, 5'10", pretty much average size for a male. And I don't think I could be on the back of one of these. I've never been on one, but honestly, I don't see myself ever being able to ride on the back of a super sport like this. It's just dumb. The seat just looks so small. It's so high up off the ground and awkward. The bike's just, it's not meant to have someone on the back whatsoever. So I do kind of hate that about this bike, and I wish I did have a bike that I could take like my wife for rides on. She's never been on the back of a motorcycle while I was riding, so the R3 just didn't have enough power and kind of had the same issue of having just not enough space and not being big enough. So that might be something for me to consider in my next bike. But you know, I've always wanted sport bikes, and I wanted to learn how to ride, and I like to ride fast. So again, I knew that going into it, and that's going to be a recurring theme. Is a lot of the things that I do hate about the R1 I was expecting to experience. I wouldn't say that I'm, again, surprised by any of the things that I hate about it, so just bear that in mind. So yeah, second thing I definitely hate is that I can't take anybody for rides on it. The third thing that I hate, and this is kind of interesting for me, it's the fact that yes, you can ride this bike slow, right? Like it can do slow speed stuff. I ride it around town all the time. It's not like, oh, it's so annoying and so frustrating and so difficult. It's not that. It's just the bike wants to go fast. Like it's you don't even think about it and you're going 50, 60, 70. Like you don't even have to like inhale and you're already going that fast. And while that's great when you're in the canyons, while that's great when you're on the track, it's not so great when you're around town. It just, you know, it takes a higher level of self-control and self-awareness because of that. Because sometimes it's not even like I'm trying to go fast. It just goes fast. You know, like, because once you're up in the RPM range, you're going faster than you think. If you're not looking at your speed, or if you don't know the bike well enough, it's like, dude, like, I'm already going 70. What's going on? So I do kind of hate that about this bike, because it's very easy to go, you know, illegal speeds. And again, if you're in the canyons and you're trying to go fast, all right. If you're on the track, definitely want the bike to just want to go fast. I had heard people say it in videos and reviews that I had watched about the R1 prior to getting it, but it's one of those things that you don't really truly understand or fathom until you have the bike. So number 3, bike always wants to go fast. Definitely don't always enjoy that fact about it. Number 4, and this is going to be said for a lot of bikes, but I mean, this bike's definitely going to be up with the worst of them. This bike attracts a lot of attention, and not just the good kind of attention. You know what I'm talking about. Police officers, they can like sense you're there, even if your bike's not on. It's like you just started up at home, like to go to the canyons, and the cop's like, there's an R1 coming. And I have an aftermarket exhaust, a full titanium Akrapovic exhaust, so it's definitely louder than stock. Now, that being said, just because it's louder than stock doesn't necessarily mean it's going to attract that much more attention. It's still a pretty loud bike, stock, from what I've heard. I mean, I've seen R1s and heard R1s that are stock, and they're still pretty loud. It's just the fact that it's a super sport. Of course, the exhaust, yes, is going to make it more audible, but it's always going to attract attention from police officers, like, no matter what. And it kind of sucks, because it makes it just that much more risky to go out and ride. You know, I've got one speeding ticket on it so far, which was 55 and a 40, which isn't the worst thing ever. You know, could be worse. But again, it's just not something that's fun in terms of an aspect, right? I mean, who would be like, yeah, I don't hate that, I like having attention from cops? No, I mean, it's definitely a huge downside to riding this on the street. But again, and I have to reinforce this, it is a track machine. Like, these bikes, these leader bikes, I mean, and I'm not talking just like any leader bike. I'm talking specifically to the super bikes. So you have your ZX10R, your R1s, your CBR1000RR Fireblades, that one Suzuki bike, no, I'm just kidding, the Gixxers. They're made for the track, and the aggressive look, the aggressive sound, the speed, the gearing, they're always going to get attention from the cops. So number 4 for me, 100%. I hate that cops love these bikes or love pulling them over. So the 5th and final thing, which honestly the 5th thing was probably the hardest thing to come up with, and it's kind of a cop-out honestly, but if I have to think of something and I have to think of 5 things total, I'd have to say it's the cost of ownership would be something that I hate about this bike. That's not going to be a problem for a lot of people, especially if you have the money for one of these. Typically you can afford the cost of ownership. However, I'm not a huge fan. Nobody's a huge fan of spending money. Like, to be fair, I'm just not a huge fan. I mean, who's a huge fan of spending money just for upkeep, you know? Like, if you can save money, it's always a good thing, in my opinion. I mean, some people are careless with their money, but I like to invest what I feel is necessary and what makes sense. Now, the R1 isn't really that necessary and doesn't really make sense, but this is like one of the few things in my life that I want to enjoy. So the biggest thing that I've noticed already are tires. The bike's tires, if you get decent ones, are very expensive and they don't last very long at all. The stock tires on this bike from the previous owner to me riding it lasted like less than 4,000 miles, which that might actually be really good for some people out there that ride really hard, but like 4,000 miles, man, that's gonna be a lot of tire changes. And it's a lot of maintenance and upkeep, you know. And I don't know how much this really counts, but like another thing is having to like replace the tank grips on this. I've been really having problems with that. I'm on the 3rd set, and I feel like it's a combination of the design of the R1 with the design of the tank pads that just doesn't really work. And I use different companies' tank pads, so it's not like I only used one company and the same exact ones. I've used 3 different sets from 2 different companies, and I've had the exact same problem with all 3. So what it is there's like a little plastic piece down below the tank, and the tank pads have 2 sets on each side, so like 2 pads and 2 pads. Some on the tank here, and then underneath the tank on that plastic piece. So I think what the problem is that plastic piece just doesn't do well with adhesive. So I mean, I've had to spend a little bit more than I wanted to on tank pads. But yeah, I mean, is that a problem specific to the R1? It might be, you know, if you really want to put all the tank pads on there, because I'm considering just removing the ones that are on the plastic and leaving the ones on the tank and calling it a day. But if you really want to leave all 4 tank pads, you might be replacing them a lot, especially if you ride aggressively. So random little tidbits here and there just about maintenance and things to think about. If you're thinking about getting an R1, these are the most pronounced things to me. And I guess something that I forgot that falls under maintenance maybe is gas mileage. Just cost of ownership in general. This bike gets terrible gas mileage. I'm feeling up like all the time on this thing. So just gotta think about all the different facets. Do I hate this bike? Hell no, I love this bike. This thing is like my favorite thing I've ever owned, like 100%. And I had a 600 horsepower Mitsubishi Evolution 10. Like, dude, this thing just outdoes everything though. Like, it's just the best, man. I love this bike. Do I love everything about it? Of course not. It's impossible to love everything about everything. So with that being said, guys, that's going to conclude part 1. 5 things I hate about my Yamaha R1. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if any of that makes sense to you guys. Hit the like button if you found the video useful. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see the next video, which is going to be the 5 things that I love about my R1, and I mean, that's just going to be full of biased goodness. So if you love sport bikes, subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos, let me know what you guys think. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.